each generation kind of taking a longer time to get into what those normal phases of life would be.
We're in a revolutionary period, a period of disruption and chaos, of many things all at once crumbling and then collapsing.
Boomers, according to this generational theory, were the prophet generation. Gen X were the nomad generation. Interestingly, ironically, the millennials are the hero generation. Why that is? Because we millennials will inherit the crisis.
It's Friday of Labor Day weekend, and welcome to another edition of Real Polling in Real Time with Zogby. Hey, Jer, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing fine. How about you?
I'm doing okay, yeah. And speaking of real polling in real time, we are in the field right now as we speak and expect to have fresh polling results on a wide variety of important issues, which we will release next week, sometime after Labor Day, in a podcast. But for now, you and I had a brief chat yesterday, and we decided we wanted to update both ourselves as well as our subscribers, watchers, and listeners on the notion of age cohorts and what may be germinating and developing among them. And so if you don't mind, I thought I'd take a few minutes to just do kind of a broad overview on age cohorts in America. So first and foremost, when we talk about age cohorts, I think everybody needs to know we're not talking about the life cycle. We're not talking about 20-somethings, 30-somethings, 40-somethings. We're talking about people and the values and character that they developed because of the historical period in which they live. So, for example, I'm a baby boomer, aging baby boomer, and we grew up as children in schools during the Cold War, learning about good versus evil, the U.S. versus the Soviet Union, and internalizing those values. But what changed us and what defined our persona to a great degree was television. And the fact that television news expanded, it was video, and for the first time we got to see the United States' behavior in war overseas, in hosing down and setting dogs on civil rights demonstrators, on an assassination of a U.S. president. And we became, by and large, rebellious, even to the point where there was a generation gap between us and our parents, who were of the greatest generation of the Depression and World War II. Our years are 1946 to about 1963 or 64. We boomers are followed by what's popularly called Gen X. This is a group that born during the mid-60s to the late 70s, and essentially they're born into an America where everything seems to be coming apart. We start with political assassinations, splits over civil rights and war in Vietnam, shortages, structural recessions, oil embargo, other nations challenging the America at the height of the American century. And Gen X is, with all respect, an age cohort that's adrift. In other words, learning that familiar institutions that were supposed to be giving comfort and always had to a great degree were no longer there. Divorce rates were up. Abortion was legalized. It was no longer the United States, right or wrong. This is a group that fundamentally, not entirely, but fundamentally is more libertarian than other older groups simply because they were on their own. Followed then by the famous millennials, even larger than baby boomers. We're looking at about 1980 to 1996 as their years of birth. What defines them is technology and the tremendous advance in communications technology in particular. These are people then who evolve into a time where the world is available to them literally in the palm of their hand. And so they are defined by an expansion of global culture, a facility with global music and global fashion. They have social networks that include people who are all over the world. And they have, I called them in my writings, the first globals. None of us age cohorts are perfect in any way, but they are the children of boomers, and to a great degree, not entirely at all, but to a great degree share a number of the values with boomers. And then we moved to Gen Z, 1997 to the present. And Gen Z, again, are born into an America falling apart. They are 100% netizens, however, unlike even millennials who can remember a time without an internet as small children. These Gen Z are totally in a technology world. With each age group, the level of stress and anxiety is growing. What do Gen Z share in common? An America that perhaps is no longer the world leader, an America that has, this is a crazy phrase, but has lost its innocence, an America that is not necessarily appreciated throughout the world, but also an appreciation of technology, but finally a fear of technology as we move more and more towards artificial intelligence, deep concerns about jobs, about future, about personal and social relations, about a lot of things. That's the view from 35,000 feet. Was that all right to start?
Yeah. I mean, and I can just fill in because
Sure.
I think by and large, that's a comprehensive picture. I want to pick up with anxiety, and I want to fit it into the notion of the fourth turning, which I subscribe to this generational theory of history that is seasonal history, and the fourth turning is the fourth phase. It's the fourth season. It's the winter, and really all you need to know. I mean, you should read the book, but as a basic primer, the American Revolution was the fourth turning. And 4 generations later, about 80 years, the Civil War was another fourth turning. And then about 80 years later, 70, 80 years later, the Great Depression into World War II was the fourth turning. And then another 70, 80 years later after that, here we are entering the 2020s. We are in the fourth of the fourth turning, which I interpret as the granddaddy of all the fourth turnings. And Neil Howe and William Strauss lay this out elaborately with the archetypal generations that fit into each. And that's where I'll pick up. But it's absolutely key to talk about where you left off on the stress and anxiety among Gen Z, because they've been born into almost inherently a world of stress and anxiety, because we are now in the crisis phase, the fourth turning. And if you agree with this notion of history, which I do, this is the march of history. There's no escaping this. This is like, it's like trying to escape winter and spring and summer and fall. It's just not going to happen. But to go back now, the baby boomers, one thing I would just add to that is when I look at the baby boomers from a historical point of view, I cannot help but notice that, this was a generation by and large, from my vantage point, I think this is completely accurate, a generation that has basically more or less only known boom times. Sure, baby boomer comes from, those pent up World War II soldiers who came back to the GI Bill and a society that gave them benefits, and they had a lot of babies, and that was the boom. But the boom and the boomer is also the golden age of the 50s, and still, a strong economy, even though the 70s was a period of somewhat crisis. By and large, picking up with the 80s and then into the 90s and in the early 2000s, boomers have been able to accumulate more and more and more wealth. They are entirely driven by an ethos of an overall booming economy with some blips in between, but also mass marketing. They were the first generation from the time they entered into this world, a generation that was mass marketed to, and every phase of their life involved some kind of mass marketing. I would even argue, and this is up for discussion, but I mean, even the rebellious culture was more or less marketed to them. I don't think it was as much organic as we think, especially when you look into certain things. But we don't have to go down in that road. The Generation X, as you laid out, they came of age in a societal breakdown. The 70s and that dark culture, parents divorcing, horror films, galore, heavy metal, crazy music. It was just a dark time. And, that's why they became helicopter parents, because they were called latchkey kids. And when they had parents, they were just, watching every single move because they didn't want their kids to grow up in that uncertainty that they did. The thing about the millennials, and millennials get a lot of flack. And this ties back to, and Neil Howe said this, the man who wrote the book on this. He says we need to kind of re-examine the timelines of the generations, because the generations have kind of lengthened a little bit. And let me demonstrate that. And I'll get back to millennials. Boomers, probably because of their economic success and the world that they inherited, they're avoiding becoming elderly. You could just see that everywhere. Generation X typically should have entered positions of leadership maybe 5-10 years ago, but they're just starting and only recently starting to get into positions of leadership. And millennials have been putting off becoming parents and getting married and homeowners, and the statistics are unbelievable. I mean, here's one stat. Last year, the average age of a home buyer, a first-time home buyer, was 38 years old, okay? So that's just in the nature of this fourth turning that's kind of slowing things down. And so we kind of need to reevaluate exactly what those years are. Neil Howe suggests, for example, Gen X is probably now better described as 61 to 81. But all of that is to say that with each generation kind of taking a longer time to get into what those normal phases of life would be, that's creating tension. And it's creating a lot of tension. And you see a lot of finger pointing. You see, okay, boomer and okay, millennial. And I understand that, but really at the end of the day, this is kind of just the march of history. And I think people would be better to understand that it's not a personal thing. It's really just the mechanics of history, and it's going to play itself out. I will say one more thing. The boomers, according to this generational theory, were the prophet generation. Gen X were the nomad generation. Interestingly, ironically, the millennials are the hero generation. Why that is? Because we millennials will inherit the crisis. boomers are probably not going to see the totality of the crisis. A lot of them aren't going to see it, but it's the millennials who are by and large going to have to pick up the pieces, and they're going to have to rebuild it. And probably they'll share that with Generation X, but that's what's going to make them a hero generation, is that they're going to rebuild the next order. They're going to have to, because it's coming apart.
Well, I subscribe to all of that. And I'll just add that I've written about that in The Way Will Be and in First Globals. A couple of things, though, that I think stand out. One is that I have been amazed over the years the degree to which, while I grew up in a generation gap, cultural gap between us baby boomers and the greatest generation of World War II, I still see an absence of a generation gap today. Now, that's not to say that there aren't differences, different outlooks on the world, some impatience, okay boomer, okay millennial, that manifest themselves. But it's not two oppositional cultures rejecting the legitimacy of each. And I think that that's encouraging to me. And also it speaks for Gen Z as well. Let's not forget them. The second thing that I would point out is we're in a revolutionary period, a period of disruption and chaos, of many things all at once crumbling and then collapsing in front of our very eyes in real time. We can look at Donald Trump and see the disruption, that his administration brings. But Donald Trump's presidency is a symptom of a much larger falling apart, coming apart. These are institutions that no longer serve a fast-paced, tech-driven world. Decisions have to be made quickly. Decisions have to be made by consensus. Decisions have to be made more and more democratically. And we will get to that point. And I do subscribe to the notion of a hero generation. And in fact, in some instances, have been called a Pollyanna, because I place too much faith in millennials and Gen Z, mainly because you're not steeped. They are not steeped in a defensive culture. They had nothing at all to do with this disruption. They're not responsible to cure this disruption. Their responsibility is to take leadership and really start anew. And I think we're at that point. And I've said on numerous occasions that things will get worse, period of disruption and revolution, before things get better. We are in the eye of the storm right now. And the one thing that gives me hope is our millennials and Gen Z, who have the opportunity then to not say, but we always have to do this, but we've always relied on that, but to move forward and create the kinds of decision-making structures, the kinds of value structures, the kinds of spiritual entities, government entities that make much more sense for a 21st century and beyond than anything that those of us who are in a defensive position, first and foremost, could ever come up with.
Yeah, and I would just be careful of trying to early on determine what that needs to be. Whether, you're saying, yeah, I mean, you do need consensus, but, and yeah, there should be quick decisions, but maybe that's the problem. Maybe part of the problem is making too quick of a decision and thinking you need to react to it is really just going to create more chaos. So I don't know what that's going to look like. I think we're only going to know after the smoke clears from the rubble. And only then, when the smoke clears, it's going to be understood the totality of the undoing and destruction of the old order that your generation are so familiar with. Probably AI is going to play a more dominant role, although, some people say that it's in a bubble. I think that's probably true. But here's the key, and I think this goes back to the other issue with anxiety and that Gen Z has about technology, specifically AI. And this will be my concluding point, is we ultimately have a say in that. If we fall into this doom loop of pessimism and cynicism that AI is just going to take over, and that, we also just accept feeding AI and accept it as if it's entirely determined, we more than likely will experience a self-fulfilling prophecy of that. But yet, if we demand office holders, and I'm not going to say leaders, I like better office holders, that they place certain constraints on it, and that we have more of a conversation about how it can be a tool, and less this crazy notion of super godlike intelligence that certain circles in Silicon Valley are obsessed with, and obsessed with living forever. That it can be a tool that can help us, but we ultimately, humans, are the masters, and that we have to seek higher levels of intelligence and consciousness, not just by relying on a program, but us. I think then we're starting to build the reality of what AI is like. And so I steer clear from that nihilistic pessimism, because I see a lot of negativity in that. I think we can empower ourselves to direct what a future with AI can look like. I think we should have that conversation.
Yeah, I agree with you that there will always be a need for human agency. I mean, I just don't see the fundamental makeup of humans, and particularly younger humans, to just roll over and say, I'm defeated. This rules, and there's no place for me in this society. It hasn't happened before when there have been radical, dramatic changes. These are even more radical and dramatic changes, and yet a greater need for human intervention, human feeling, humanitarianism than ever before. And so I don't see us ruled by machines, but I do see us meaning human beings, as a greater force for reining in machines and asserting ourselves. This will be a battle, to be sure, but we have survived battles before. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's enough to go into the Labor Day weekend and relax and reflect.
Yep.
I wouldn't add anymore.
And new numbers next week, right?
Yeah, and we should do a podcast more towards the middle rather than the end of the week. Okay. So stay tuned for that.
Okay, Millennial.
Okay, Boomer.
All right. Take care. Have a good week.